What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like it in Magic, and today we're going to try and make walls work. It's not as easy as some people make it out to be, but we've definitely got some new tools, so let's see if we can get this thing built. The deck, not the kitty switch, real quick. Yeah, you may have noticed the new kitten exploring around here somewhere. I'm not sure where she got off to at this point, but Ziggy's still the boss. I'm still going to see a lot of Ziggy. He's my number one. A day one, my ride or die. You're a good kitty, bub. You're a good cat. But in any case, the first extremist position I'm going to advocate for here is 4 copies of both Arcades the Strategist and 4 copies of High Alert. Because once you got 8 of an effect, you got yourself a deck. Sounds like a thing I just came up with. It's actually already a thing. You want 8 whole redundant copies of one effect before you base your entire deck around said effect. Not only do you have to find at least one of these effects every single game to have any hope of actually winning, but you have to keep them out too. You know, that's why you have to have all 4 copies of Arcades. He's got this huge target on its back, so even when you do find him, successfully resolve him, he's got to stay on the battlefield too. High Alert, not necessarily safe either, so you need a lot of redundancy to actually pop off with this deck, so 4 copies of both. Now, Arcades is a master of strategery. And with 24 different defender creatures in the deck, he's going to draw you a bunch of cards, put a lot of gas in the tank once he actually comes down, and you can untap with him in play. But High Alert is slightly different. This actually allows creatures without defender to use their toughness as power in combat, and that's kind of important with a couple of corner interactions here and there in this deck. There's a couple of other really important cards in the deck that can just help us win outright and out of nowhere if we get them. So before I get to the sort of core defenders, let me talk about these things real quick. We're playing 3 copies of Tetsuko in the deck, and I kind of kicked myself for not playing this in the Cavalcade of Calamity deck. If you haven't seen that yet, check it out. It's under 20 bucks. Good deck, but I just couldn't pass it up in this thing, you know. Obviously, it's a real funny meme interaction, but it still works. You know, if you can actually get this down while you have a High Alert or an Arcades in play, then all your things are suddenly unblockable. Look at that. So you can just get through and win the game right then and there when you drop a Tetsuko on turn 4 or 5. But I'm also playing a couple of copies of Tower Defense. This thing is obviously awesome in this deck too, right? I've seen plenty of people brewing this deck up, and there's a lot of main decks that don't include this card, and I just don't see it. It's a ridiculous blowout as soon as you play it. And even if you just get through a couple of walls, probably going to win that game, right? So I just gotta play Tower Defense. I don't want to play too many copies or anything, but if we do draw this in the later-ish game, then we can obviously make good use of it. But even if it's on our opening hand, it's not too hard to engineer a situation where Tower Defense wins us a game. Pretty much the entire rest of the deck is just defender dudes that we're playing, you know? And we're actually keeping the curve really, really low here. We're playing 16 different 1-drop walls and defender guys in this deck, which is way different than I've usually seen from what people have done with this deck. You see a lot of 2-drops in this deck, but you know me.
I want to go fast.
And I kind of think that we have to go fast if we have any real hope of winning here. You know, what we really want to do is drop a High Alert on 3 or an Arcades on 4 and just swing in with the walls that we already have on the board for 11 or 15. It's entirely possible to engineer that situation, but it involves playing a bunch of 1-drops. That's okay, because all of our 1-drops convert into 1-mana 3/3s. So what's not to like about that, you know? But the most important of our 1-drops is easily Saruli Caretaker. This is actually one of the most important cards in the deck, bar none, because it opens up all those turn sequences where you actually do swing for 11 or 15 on turn 3 or 4. And it's actually not too hard to pull off as long as you do open with a Caretaker and maybe one other 1-drop in your hand. A couple of sequences with Caretaker that are really important to the deck are obviously turn 1 Caretaker. Into turn 2, 2 more 1-drops. At that point, you can even tap one of the fresh 1-drops and a Caretaker. Yes, that's entirely legal. To play another 1-drop if you want to, but another sequence that's a lot more common is to play Caretaker on 1, and then turn 2, you'll play a 2-drop, tap that 2-drop and the Caretaker into another 1-drop. That means that on turn 3, you can drop High Alert and swing for an easy 10 or 11 damage, and that's exactly where we want to be. But Caretaker does a lot more than that too, you know? This ramps us into an Arcades on turn 3 sometimes. Go ahead and start drawing cards faster, prepare for a big attack step on turn 4. It also fixes our mana, super important to us in our deck. So I could go on and on about Caretaker to try to convince you that this is one of the most important cards in the deck, but get a couple of reps in and it'll be self-evident. This card is very important. But another green 1-drop we got to play 4 of, even if we're not trying to prioritize 1-drops, still play 4 copies of Portka.
Porky Pocket? portcullis.
Portcullis vine, that's what it's called. Actually, I've known what a portcullis was since I was 13 because of another Magic card, portcullis. But in any case, of course we got to play this. This opens up even more card selection, card advantage options for us a little bit later in the game. If the game does drag, again, we're trying to win quickly here, but if the game does drag, we have ways of drawing cards not only with Arcades, but this, we can just block something. We don't even care if our wall dies, if our wall's going to die anyway, sacrifice a divine, draw a card, there's a lot of extra gas and a few different late game sinks for this deck the way it's constructed. So not only are we trying to win quickly, but we've got effects like this we can sink mana into in the late game and kind of play defense if we absolutely need to, but also stay up on cards. But white has a couple of important one-drops for the deck too, to say the least. We got to play Resolute Watchdog as a 4-of as well. This is another thing, I think the deck just naturally prioritizes one-drops, or at least it should, because all these one-drops are so integral to what the deck is trying to do. Resolute Watchdog can protect an Arcades or a Tetsuko some of the time from a removal spell, and just that is so paramount to what this deck is attempting to do. And it too is just a 1-mana 3/3, he attack, he protect, he do all that stuff. So not only can this keep a really important creature on the battlefield when you want it to, but again, it just converts into a pretty decent attacker from just a 1-mana investment. But why not play 4 copies of Novice Knight? While we're here, let's finish off the 1-drops. This card's important for the deck too. It doesn't do a whole lot more than block, but it blocks better than any of our other 1-drops. In the meantime, while we're waiting to get set up, this can actually just kill stuff that tries to swing in on us. This is a pretty daunting card for aggro decks to actually swing in on. But into the 2-drops, you got a lot of options here, but I'm going to start with 4 copies of Grappling Sundew. Now, the whole reason I'm playing this is because it has reach. I do like that the mana sink gives it indestructibility in the late game. Sometimes that'll be really important, especially if you do get to the quite late game and you've got that much mana to just burn. I'll just spin this, I don't care. Sometimes it takes a while to get there, but it is an important ability. But the reach is actually more important to me on a 2-drop creature right now. Mono blue tempo is actually a really important deck right now, so blocking flyers in the early game is actually kind of something that we want to be able to do. But I'm also playing 4 copies of Wall of Mist. This ends the 2-drop defenders and stuff in the deck. And again, I know there's a lot of choices. We'll get to the other stuff you could be playing a little bit later. But Wall of Mist is important to me because it has 5 toughness. There you go. It's effectively a 5/5, bigger than pretty much any of the other 2-drops we could be playing. And that, I think, is worth enough in and of itself, by Waverly. But for now, I'm sure you'll be back. She's really interested in what I'm doing here. She's not quite sure. But anyway, Wall of Mist. Not only is this just bigger, effectively, than anything else we could play in this slot, but it also beats Lava Coil. That's important in the current format. And it can beat 4 power creatures in combat, which is kind of important too. So I think there's a lot of little edge reasons to play this card over some of the other 2-drops we could play. But like I said, I'll get to some of your options a little bit later. Well, I'm running 23 lands in this thing. We've got 14 green sources, 14 white sources, and 11 blue sources here. 11 is not so much, but we've got another blue source in the sideboard because most of our sideboard is blue, it turns out. But 11 is enough to find things like High Alert by turn 3, and remember that we've got Ceruli Caretaker in the deck as well. So not too much sweating the blue sources. It's more the green and white that I'm worried about, and we got plenty of both, especially for turn 1 plays. Note that we have 8 white 1-drops and 8 green 1-drops, so we have to have a lot of untapped mana in both of those sources on turn 1. We've got 11 of each. Now here's the sideboard. Like I said, most of this is blue, and most of it's counterspells, actually. We've got the normal fare, Spell Pierce to counter early sweepers and spot removal and such, Dive Down to protect creatures like Arcades, Tetsuko, and other stuff that we might want to protect, Negate to also counter removal and sweepers, but also important non-creature stuff like Wilderness Reclamation and Expansion Explosion. There's a ton of stuff to fairy, you know what I mean, you've been there, and Disdainful Stroke to do the same with expensive spells, and Hydroid Krasis and such, so all that's important, plus Ixalan's Binding. Also a pretty good play against Krasis, but takes out Rekindling Phoenix, a card that we absolutely hate, and a bunch of other big stuff. Then, we've got an island to make sure we can cast all this blue stuff, including the 4 copies of Surge Mare. I've seen a lot of decks where this is a 4 of in the main deck, but I just don't think we're playing enough blue sources to reliably cast this in every game, especially in game 1. But once we take out usually a white source, a plains, and switch in the second island. It's a little bit easier to get a Surge Mare in Game 2. It doesn't magically make it, super easy, but it's still a lot easier. And this is an important card. Against green decks, it's effectively unblockable all the time, regardless of whether or not you have a Tetsuko. And that's great. It's 5 toughness, which means it's 5 power a lot of the time. And it loots when it hits, so you really couldn't ask for a better creature than this. I just think that 2 blue mana is really, really taxing on the mana base. So I didn't play it in the main, but obviously it's so important against green decks that you want to put it in after game 1. Now, as far as stuff I didn't play that you could play if you felt like it, there's obviously a bunch of 2-drops here. Gleaming Barrier and Suspicious Bookcase being probably the 2 best to mention. Gleaming Barrier will get you a little bit of extra mana when it actually does die. And that's kind of nice. That's a good thing for it to do. And it doesn't tax the mana base. Neither does Suspicious Bookcase. I could see it being pretty important to have, cards that actually don't cost specific colors of mana in a 3-color deck. Especially if you're just trying to cast these things on turn 2. It might increase your consistency by a smidge, but at the same time, I just think the Wall of Mist and Grappling Sundew are much, much better options than these, although I could see like a 2-2 split with either one of them to incorporate Bookcase. This is the card that I'd be most likely to include as far as 2-drops go. Suspicious Bookcase gives us a little bit of redundancy with Tetsuko, and that's a nice thing. We want that a lot of the time. Making one of our creatures go unblocked can sometimes just win a game over the course of a couple of turns. So I could definitely see putting Bookcase in as a 1 or 2 of. Wouldn't fault you if you wanted to do that. But another thing you see a lot of here is Amaranthine Wall. You'll see Golden Guardian occasionally too, but I'm really not sure this is the deck for Guardian. Just because it has the word Defender printed on it, I don't think it makes it a shoe-in. As far as Amaranthine Wall goes, yeah, maybe. You got a big 6/6 indestructible. The indestructibility is actually really, really cheap on it. So I could see this working, but I'm prioritizing speed here. I want to play as few 4-drops as we possibly can. And again, with a deck that's prioritizing speed, I just don't think that this is exactly where you want to be. But in certain builds, this could be a great 2 or 3 of. And here are your power rankings. A final score of 60. Not super high, right? I mean, we're playing a bunch of walls. I think we've made the deck as good as it can get right this second. Again, we're fairly speedy for a walls deck. We actually have a higher offense score than we have a defense score. That's a thing for a wall deck to pull off, because once you actually do have one of the key critical pieces in play, the deck switches to offense real quick, but it can obviously block in the meantime. It's pretty decent while setting up against aggro, because a lot of our early creatures have 3 or 4 or even 5 toughness, so we just present literally brick walls and speed bumps for them to have to get over. And once we do drop one of our important cards like a High Alert or an Arcades, then suddenly we've just gone way over the top of everything they're trying to do. So if you're facing off against a lot of aggro, not a bad deck, but it's not terrible against mid-range control either, especially when control is trying to lean on sweepers like Kaya's Wrath that take until turn 4 at the very least to pop off, sometimes more than that while they're trying to get the mana right on the thing, So this deck can actually sneak in up under really popular sweepers in the format if you get the right turn sequence. That said, it's also literally like playing against a brick wall. I'm going to use that joke again because it doesn't interact. It doesn't interact hardly at all. There's a couple of counter spells, some Ixalan's Binding once you get to game 2 and 3, but in the first game we're just trying to do what we've set out to do, and we really kind of don't care about what they're doing. But of course, that's not always the best thing to be doing. So sometimes not caring about what our opponent is doing is going to get us a little bit of hot water, but mostly we're just trying to execute our plan, and if we can actually win. So give this thing a shot. It's about $1.75, not $1.75, $175 right now on TCG Player, which is a bit much, but it's kind of all in the lands. You'll note that like all the Defender guys are playing at like 5, 10, 15 cents at the most. So if you just wanted to play Guild Gates or something like that, you could get this deck down to a really respectable level. It's just like $30 for the playset of Arcades, Aside from that though, the deck is actually really, really cheap. Give this thing a shot, even if you have to play it in Guild Gate form. It's a fun deck, and playing Guild Gates only backs you up by like a turn or 2 most of the time, so you're still going to swing in for a lot of unblockable damage on like turn 5. There's nothing wrong with that either. And as always, if you wanted to try this thing out, click the first link in the description. Go to TCG Player. I can't say it too loud. I got a little kitten in my arms. But in any case, go over there, click the first link in the description, check out the deck list, order anything you need. Also, other stuff. Make sure you like the video, subscribe if you're new. In case you're new, if you want more kittens, I think she's gone for now. You gonna get off, baby? You're your own person. You do what you want to do. It's cool. I'm cool with that. But, oh, she almost fell. She's okay. But in any case, run along to the Patreon. Link in the description for that. Just $1 a month will help you, vote on what decks you want to see around here. So you could affect the course of YouTube history and see more kittens. Let me know all that stuff, and I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.